Google just did something with Gemini that I genuinely did not think any major AI company would do this fast. And the reaction from the security community tells you everything. Not the reaction from tech bloggers looking for clicks. Not the reaction from people paid to be optimistic about AI. I mean researchers, privacy advocates, and former Google engineers. People who spent years building these systems, watching what just happened and going quiet. That specific kind of quiet that comes before someone says the thing they've been afraid to say out loud. So let me say it for them. Because what Gemini just did changes the equation on AI assistance, data exposure, and how much of your private life is now sitting inside a corporate AI pipeline. And it happened faster than anyone predicted. Let me walk you through exactly what Gemini did, because the technical reality is more unsettling than the headlines made it sound. In early 2025, Google quietly expanded Gemini's integration across its core product suite: Gmail, Google Docs, Google Drive, Google Calendar, and Google Search. In a way that is fundamentally different from how AI assistants have operated before. Previous integrations were reactive. You asked, the AI fetched. What Gemini is now doing, according to documentation published by Google itself and independently analyzed by researchers at the Electronic Frontier Foundation, is proactive cross-context synthesis. In plain language, Gemini isn't waiting to be asked. It is actively reading across your connected services, building what Google calls a personal context model, and using that to preload responses before you even type a question. Think about what that means in practice. Your emails are being scanned not just when you ask Gemini to summarize them, they're being parsed as background input to model what you care about, who you talk to, what decisions you're facing. Your calendar tells it your schedule, your stress points, your upcoming deadlines. Your Drive tells it what projects you're working on. Your search history tells it what you're afraid of, curious about, and planning. And all of that is being woven together into a persistent model of you, or one that Gemini carries forward from session to session. Ben Dickinson, a researcher at the Center for AI Safety, published an analysis in March 2025 describing this architecture as ambient intelligence extraction, a term that sounds clinical until you sit with what it actually means. Your AI assistant is no longer a tool you pick up and put down. It is ambient. It is always in the room. And it is always listening to the room, even when you didn't ask it a question. The Electronic Frontier Foundation flagged this in a detailed post titled Gemini's Context Problem, noting that Google's Terms of Service update from January 2025 quietly expanded the scope of what Gemini collected data can be used for, specifically for service improvement and model training purposes. That phrase, model training, is doing enormous work in that sentence. It means that the synthesis Gemini is performing on your personal data isn't just to answer your questions. It's being fed back into improving Gemini itself. You're not just a user of the model, you're training material for it. Independent privacy auditor Wolfie Crystal, who has done extensive documentation of data broker, ecosystems, and corporate tracking infrastructure, put it plainly in a thread that got wide circulation in the security community. Google has built something that combines the ambient data collection of a smart home device, the behavioral profiling depth of an ad network, and the conversational intimacy of a personal assistant, and called it a productivity tool. That framing stuck with me. Because it's not wrong. Think about what that means for you specifically. If you use Gmail, and most people reading this do, your most private communications, job negotiations, health questions you've emailed to a doctor, financial conversations, relationship struggles, are now part of the context Gemini is using to model who you are. Not anonymized, not aggregated. You, your inbox, your voice, your patterns. That's a fundamentally different relationship than this company shows me ads based on what I search. Here's where this gets interesting. Because the scale of this changes the threat model entirely. This isn't a data breach. Nothing was stolen. No hacker was involved. What happened is that Google built a system that is technically operating within its terms of service, technically consensual because you agreed to terms most people never read, and technically legal under current AI regulation frameworks, which, as of mid-2025, still lag years behind the technology. The UK's Information Commissioner's Office issued guidance in April 2025, warning that AI systems performing cross-context synthesis on personal data may require explicit user consent under GDPR and UK data protection law, and that current disclosure practices by major AI companies do not meet the bar for meaningful informed consent. That's a regulatory body using careful bureaucratic language to say users don't actually know what they've agreed to. Here's what really bothers me about this. Google knows exactly how this looks. They know what the privacy implications are. They employ some of the most sophisticated privacy engineers on the planet. People who have written academic papers on the ethics of data use, people who have testified in front of regulators, people who understand better than anyone what proactive cross-context synthesis means at scale. And they built it anyway. And they deployed it quietly. No press event, no explainer video, no opt-in prompt that said we'd like to start reading all your connected services to build a persistent model of your behavior. Is that okay? The business reason is obvious once you see it. Google's core revenue engine, advertising, is under structural pressure from two directions simultaneously. Apple's privacy changes have degraded third-party tracking across iOS. European regulators have been systematically dismantling the behavioral advertising infrastructure Google built over 2 decades. The ad business that funds everything Google does is slowly being walled off from the outside. So the pivot is inward. If you can't track users across the web the way you used to, you build a system where users bring everything to you, where the data doesn't need to be collected from the outside, because you've convinced people to live inside your ecosystem and given them an AI assistant that synthesizes all of it. The product isn't Gemini. You are. Your behavioral model is. It's like Google built a garden and made it incredibly useful and beautiful, and then one day, slowly, quietly, started installing cameras in every corner of it and didn't change the brochure. That says private garden, members only. The garden is still beautiful. The cameras are still running, and you're still in the garden because where else would you go? When I realized the full scope of this, my honest reaction was frustration, not at the technology itself. What Gemini can do is genuinely impressive. My frustration is at the framing. The deliberate packaging of an ambient behavioral surveillance system as a helpful AI assistant. The choice to bury the consent mechanism in a terms of service update rather than present it clearly. The gap between what Google tells users Gemini is doing and what the technical reality actually is. If you've had an uneasy feeling about AI assistants lately, a sense that something shifted and you can't quite name it, you were picking up on something real. So let's talk about what you can actually control, because there are real, specific steps here. Not vague advice, not just use a VPN. Whether you want to keep using Google's ecosystem or start drawing some boundaries, there are concrete things you can do right now. The first thing is to audit and restrict Gemini's connected apps. Open your Google account settings and navigate to data and privacy, then apps and services connected to your account. What you're looking for is which Google services have granted Gemini access for proactive synthesis, not just on-demand queries. As of mid-2025, you can individually revoke Gemini's access to Gmail, Drive, and Calendar while retaining search. This won't stop all data use, but it significantly narrows the cross-context synthesis pipeline. Calm, click Data and Privacy, scroll to third-party apps and services, find Gemini Apps activity and review what's listed. Toggle off access for any service you aren't comfortable with. This takes about 5 minutes and makes a meaningful difference. Second, turn off Gemini Apps activity entirely if you want a harder boundary. This is under the same section, Gemini Apps activity. Turning this off means Google won't save your Gemini conversations to your account and significantly limits the extent to which your interactions are used for model training. Be aware, this also reduces Gemini's personalization, which is exactly the point. You're trading convenience for containment. For most personal use cases, that trade is worth making. Third, review your Google Workspace permissions if you're using a work or school account. This is where enterprise users need to pay close attention, because organizational admins control Gemini data settings at the domain level, and many IT departments haven't updated their policies to account for the January 2025 terms changes. If you're doing sensitive work in Google Docs or communicating via Gmail for business purposes, escalate this to your IT or security team immediately. Ask specifically about whether your domain has opted into Gemini's workspace integration and what the data retention settings are for AI interactions. Fourth, for those who want a separation layer between their primary Google account and their AI assistant usage, consider using a dedicated secondary Google account specifically for Gemini interactions, one that isn't connected to your main Gmail, Drive, or Calendar. This creates a hard partition between your behavioral model and your personal data. It's more friction, but friction is the point. Fifth, and this is for the technically inclined, consider migrating high sensitivity communications off Google's ecosystem entirely. ProtonMail and Tutanota both offer end-to-end encrypted email that cannot be read by the service provider, which means it cannot be fed into any AI synthesis pipeline. Nextcloud, self-hosted or via a privacy-respecting provider, handles documents and calendaring. This is the more significant lift, but for journalists, healthcare workers, legal professionals, or anyone handling genuinely sensitive information, the risk calculus has shifted. What was previously a preference for privacy is now a professional and potentially legal obligation. A quick note for enterprise and professional users. The steps above apply to personal Google accounts. If your organization has a Google Workspace contract, your data governance is controlled by your organization's agreement with Google, not individual account settings. The Gemini integration terms for Workspace differ from consumer accounts, and in some enterprise tiers, Google does not use workspace data for model training. Check with your administrator before assuming either direction. The point is to know, not to assume. Also worth saying clearly, none of this is about disabling Google's core security features. Chrome's safe browsing, Google's spam detection, account security alerts, keep those. The concern here is specifically about the proactive behavioral synthesis Gemini performs on personal content. Disabling that doesn't weaken your account security. These are separate systems. Now, here's the bigger picture. We're at a turning point with AI that feels different from every previous technology shift, and what Google just did with Gemini is the clearest signal yet of which direction we're heading. The question that's been hovering over AI assistants since they emerged is, who does this technology work for? And for the first year or so, the honest answer was ambiguous. Maybe it works for users and companies simultaneously. Maybe the interests align. What Gemini's expansion makes clear is that alignment is fragile, and when it breaks in one direction, toward the company. Google didn't need to build proactive ambient synthesis. Gemini would have been extraordinarily useful as a reactive, on-demand tool. The decision to make it ambient, to have it constantly reading across your connected services, even when you're not asking, is not a technical necessity. It's a product philosophy, a statement about what Google believes AI assistants should be. And that statement is, the AI should know everything about you continuously so that it can be maximally useful. The trade-off? Your behavioral model belongs to us, is the price Google is charging for that usefulness. They just chose not to say that plainly. You're not paranoid for finding that unsettling. You're not a Luddite for wanting a tool that responds when you call it, rather than one that watches you while you sleep. Millions of people are asking these same questions right now, and the fact that major privacy researchers, regulatory bodies, and former tech insiders are raising alarms isn't a coincidence. The concern is proportionate to what's actually happening. Your digital life, your communications, your plans, your fears, your ambitions, doesn't have to be the raw material that trains the next generation of AI models. You have choices. They involve trade-offs, some of them real, but they exist. The settings I walked you through are a starting point. The broader question of which companies you trust with ambient access to your life is one only you can answer. But you should be answering it deliberately, not by default. Do this today. Open your Google account settings tonight, not next week. The January 2025 terms change is already in effect, and every day the context model builds on your data is a day you can't unwind. The audit takes 5 minutes. The decision about how much access you want to grant takes whatever time it takes you to think clearly about what's at stake. But start now, not later. This is your data, your patterns, your private life. You get to decide how much of it lives inside someone else's AI. This took real digging to piece together. The EFF documentation, Ben Dickinson's analysis, Wolfie Crissel's work, and the ICO guidance are all public record, but connecting them into a coherent picture of what's actually happening inside Gemini's architecture required time. If this is the kind of content you want more of, subscribe and drop a comment telling me which AI company you want investigated next. I read everyone. And share this with someone who's still using Google's default settings without realizing what changed in January. They deserve to know.